Welcome back. So we have been getting a lot of requests for today's podcast content because, like every year, all of the folks who love to sell to you the belief that the real estate markets are going to crash, all of them come out of the woodwork this time of year trying to sell you something. And we're going to explain all this to you while we explain to you the myths and really the truths about what's actually happening in the real estate market. So today's podcast is called Real Estate Crash Coming? That's a question mark. 10 Myths Busted. So what we're going to do is, again, we're going to fact you so that you will know exactly what's happening in the real estate markets with regards to the health of the market and whether there's a probability of any kind of crash. And then, of course, we're going to give you our notes because a lot of you are going to need these notes if, for example, maybe one of your buyers or one of your sellers is being seduced into believing that there's some sort of big, 2008, 2009 real estate crash that's looming. You can now hit them with the facts and have them do their own homework. It's one thing to have an opinion. It is another thing altogether to have facts. And here's the thing. What you're going to learn today is a lot of people have the facts. They ignore the facts because they're trying to sell you something that you truly don't need out of fear. And Julie and I don't pull punches on this podcast, so we're going to be telling you guys the truth so you don't end up wasting your time on something that, frankly, doesn't put you in a position to help people and make money. And we're going to do our best to curb our enthusiasm for debunking some of the bunk that's being sold out there to real estate agents as pertains to a potential real estate crash. Did I hit all the high notes?
You did, but I also want to point out, having said that, because we do get excited about debunking myths and facting them and giving them talking points, quite frankly, because when you get down to it, it's a bit of objection handling.
Sure.
And scripting. But that said, we also, you especially, did your best to not go down that road and say, maybe there is something, we should research this. You're right, this time of year, they get bombarded. You said, don't let your buyers or sellers get schnookered into thinking that the world is coming to an end. Well, you, dear listener, also don't get schnookered into that because we know we reviewed together some videos, some emails, some texts. The coaches said, hey, have you seen this? Right?
But Julie, it's the same people that sell the same thing every single year, and they've been doing it since 2009. Spend this amount of money, get on this exclusive list, and then we're going to give you a bunch of potential REO relationships.
I saw a couple new ones, too.
Exactly. These are the same guys, and sometimes what happens is they get outed for selling malarkey, and then they will retool under a different name, different website, the whole thing. This has been around, and these guys will spin up every year late winter, and then by midsummer they're gone, and there it is. So look, we're just going to do our best to give you guys the 10 top myths. You're going to want our notes, and so make sure you go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and you download the notes, and the notes are going to be for you to use, but also for you to share to other real estate agents, for you to share the agents in your brokerage or your team. But you can also use them for social because these would be very great little sound bites for you to make little videos around, if not just a textual, like Instagram post. So if you want our notes, which I know you do, go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. harrisrealestatedaily.com is our exclusive newsletter where all of our notes live, as well as other great content. Like yesterday I wrote an article that I put up on our newsletter that's going to be published, I think, today, pertains to tariffs in real estate. And we're going to, be discussing that on a future podcast, but you can have advanced access to it. Just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. Remember, when you put your email in, it takes about 2 seconds, but then after that, you've got to hop over to your own email, and you've got to double opt in to confirm that you want the subscription. It costs you nothing. It takes probably about, 3 or 4 seconds, and do that now. The link is below, or if you're just listening, just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. All right, Julie Harris.
All right, as you said, they've all seen the YouTube thumbnails out there. Biggest crash ever coming, or sell now before it's too late. Panic, panic. Most of the fear-mongering, as Tim just told you, is designed to sell you something, not to actually help you. And as real estate agents and brokers, you do deserve better. We think you deserve better. So
there's
facts,
nothing wrong,
not fear, right?
There's nothing wrong with someone trying to sell something to somebody as long as the thing they're trying to sell is not something that's basically BS.
It's called being ethical.
Right.
Right. So let's roll up our sleeves and debunk the top 10 myths. I don't know if we'll get to all 10, but we're going to try about the so-called upcoming housing crash. Myth number 1, of course, here we go. We're headed for a 2008 style crash. Here's the fact. The 2008 crash, and we realize most of you listening were not selling real estate then. So Julie, we'll talk about that a little.
Because most of them weren't listening, and most of them haven't, been in real estate for more than maybe 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So Julie and I started selling real estate, essentially, effectively, we've been in the real estate business for about 30 years. Okay. So we started selling real estate in the 90s, and we've been through several corrections. Now, none of recessions really, but none of them was like the real estate crash. But when the real estate crash hit, we were running our coaching business. We were full-time in real estate coaching, and we saw that there was the real estate crash coming because we had coaching clients all over the country, and we saw that their markets were starting to slow down. These were markets that were crazy hot, and then the inventory would build, and then we saw some cycles that were happening. And we had to, essentially because we'd sold real estate, guess what? And because we actually had to do short sales, we had to have dealt with, some distressed sellers. We knew what to do. So we started our short sale designation, and then pretty much every other short sale training designation thereafter was based on the content and material that Julie and I created. We also created training that was used by a lot of the major banks. We worked with the FDIC. We worked with the National Association of Realtors.
Not just short sales, but foreclosures and BPOs.
Right.
And, yeah.
We worked with Fannie Mae. We worked with Freddie Mac. We worked with the FDIC. So we worked with all these things, all these people, all these entities. And the sole purpose and the reason they wanted to partner with us is to help train agents how to do short sales and deal with distressed sellers, because all these entities had a bunch of agents. They needed to place a bunch of listings in distressed sellers, and they wanted us to help them get the word out about how to go about working in that arena. And we taught them. And that was really a relaunch of our business. And that was back in 07 and 08. And from there, it just basically has continued to build. But the moral of the story of what I'm trying to tell you is we have been there, done that. Yeah. And I can't imagine anyone having been there, done that more than we have. So we're not just speaking from stuff we've Googled or what we were told or things we watched on YouTube.
No, we lived it.
We lived it. We were on the front lines.
Every day.
Exactly. Okay.
Yes.
So when you would, back if you were paying attention to housing back then, when you turn on CNBC and you'd hear Sheila Baird talking about what was going on, we were working with the FDIC and they were, asking us to help them. You guys get the point? So that's what our level of involvement was in the distressed real estate space. So we are what I would call legitimately market experts about this particular space.
We know of which we speak.
And I'm going to preface this by saying, unfortunately.
Yes, because that was some of the most difficult times. And I have to say, anybody who makes it sound like they're wishing for that in some way hasn't studied it and didn't live through it. Now, that said, that's kind of our background on this, which is to say we know what we're talking about. We've been through it. We sold short sales and REOs, and we've coached through it. But some of these guys, it's too mythical for them. So here's the thing. Let me clarify.
But ultimately, Julie, that's what I'm trying to speak to all the people that weren't really in real estate or even paying attention during the housing crash, because they don't know who to listen to. And if the people claim themselves to be experts and the person, you dear listener, are not validating whether the person is actually an expert based on their own experience, then you're going to end up listening to a fool.
Very well said. Some of them were not even out of high school or college. Okay, so myth number one, we're headed for that 2008 style crash. Fact, the 2008 crash was a perfect storm of bad lending practices, subprime mortgages, and an oversupply of homes, and a whole bunch of other things, but those are the top three. Fast forward to today, lending standards are way tighter, and we're facing a housing shortage by millions of homes, definitely not a surplus. According to our newsletter, Harris Real Estate Daily, you guys can read about this, inventory levels are hovering around a 2.6 month supply, which is a far cry from the 10 plus months that we saw in 2008. And in fact, it got to the point where it is nearly a 2-year supply. At the worst, I think right around 2009, it was that bad. It could not be any more different in terms of supply and demand.
And all of the housing policies that Obama administration and Tim Geithner and all these others put in place back then, and again, we were in it, so I can tell you from firsthand experience, they really, really did save the housing market in meaningful ways. Julie and I are definitely not big government, lots of regulation types, but back then, the stops that the government put on the foreclosures in particular really honestly did save a lot of families and gave a lot of people an opportunity to have, a graceful exit from their homes. That, by the way, was a nice term that Fannie Mae came up. It was, the banks would have just assumed, say, get the heck out. But basically the government said, insuring most of the mortgages and those that were distressed, that were Fannie Mae insured, it was like, oh no, we're going to allow them to have a graceful exit. I thought that was really nice, honestly.
A smooth transition.
Smooth transition. And then they would give them, a way to leave the home with a little bit of money. And
cash for keys.
Right, all this. So the moral of the story, what I'm trying to tell you guys is that that's nothing like that is even remotely going to happen.
No.
And we're going to prove it to you with the subsequent points that we're about to make.
Yes.
Myth number 2, Julie.
Myth number 2, rising mortgage rates will tank the market. Okay, here's the fact. Sure, higher rates do slow demand, but they won't and don't cause market crashes. History tells us that housing markets can thrive even when rates climb. We've pointed out that even though rates have been above 6%, home prices are holding firm and even rising in most areas because, guess what? We don't have enough homes to meet the demand. Supply and demand, easy equation there. Further, there are several effective ways to reduce the mortgage interest rates, from 2-1 buy downs to paying points and fixing a lower 30-year rate, or utilizing builder incentives. So getting a better rate is not hard. In fact, it's become quite common over the past 6 to 12 months.
Now, first-time buyers are taken out by higher rates. There's no two ways about that.
Generally,
but
yeah.
the meat of the market, the middle of the market, and the upper end market, where the people have equity, they're less rate sensitive because they have lots of equity, and we're going to talk about that in a next point or the point after that. And so the moral of the story is people, and this is the blessing of selling real estate. You're selling something that people always need. And so there's going to be always reasons why those people, always reasons why someone's going to want to buy a home. Or I'm sorry, always reasons someone's going to want to sell a home. And so the natural market dynamics of changing lifestyles. Someone got a new job, they have to relocate, they have a financial issue, they need a bigger house, a smaller house, they can't use the bedrooms upstairs because of the stairs, they can't walk stairs, all those things. None of those issues go away with rising rates. So rising rates and the natural progression of people as they move through life and they need housing are not necessarily tied together like an economist would have you believe. If my bedroom is upstairs and I can't walk those stairs, I don't give a rat's ass what the rates are. I need a house where I can actually, effectively live in it. I hope that makes sense.
And also, you might be a cash buyer.
Yeah, or you might be a cash buyer. Or you might be able to put enough down that the payment is to the point where it doesn't really matter.
Exactly. Okay. Myth number 3, homes are too expensive for first-time buyers. Fact, affordability is challenging, but first-time buyers are also still making moves. Tim, you made a point that, yes, they're affected, and the percentages have come down a little bit, but not dramatically. Why? Because FHA loans, down payment assistance programs, and creative financing options still keep the first-time buyer dream alive. The National Association of Realtors reported that the first-time buyers made up 32% of home purchases in 2023. I read that it was about 28% in 2024, and it should be about the same in 2025. That is not a crash. It's hardly a sign of a market on life support, right?
And Jules, I believe that statistic around 30% has been true even when the rates were super low.
Yes.
That's just what the market demand is.
Because they don't want to rent anymore.
Exactly.
They find a way, right? And, I read some statistics on that, too. A lot of the first-time buyers in today's market, their down payment is gift money from their parents. People find a way.
Well, but so that aside, I mean, the FHA and the VA and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and especially we're anticipating Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to come out of conservatorship, you're going to see an absolute avalanche of new mortgage programs that are going to come to the market, which are going to really, and frankly, I think rates are also going to fall. For reasons that are untraditional, as far as what's the Fed doing and what's the 10-year Treasury doing and all the rest of it. There could be other market forces that cause rates to go lower or effectively the payments to go lower. And I'll give you one that we talked about a little bit yesterday. Well, so if Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac come out of conservatorship, what's going to happen to PMI? So if PMI is sort of a forced expense and it adversely affects first-time home buyers, because if you think about it, if you buy, and I don't know what the PMI rate would be, but I'm going to guess it's equivalent to probably, like if you buy a $400,000 house, let's say you have a $400,000 mortgage, what's the PMI on that mortgage? Someone let me know. But I bet you it's what you do?
Yeah.
Good.
It's it actually depends on several things. The borrower's credit, how much down they have. There are things that go into it. It ranges between 0.75% and about 1.75%.
Okay, so what's that do to their monthly payment?
About $180 on a $400,000 home, assuming they put 10% down.
All right, let's see if Julie can get this next one then. So what's the equivalent of interest rate? So if someone wanted to have, if a prevailing rate now is, let's just say 7%, are you going to figure out a mortgage calculator?
I think I did this math.
You know what I'm saying? Like how much...
No, that's a different
If the rates are like 6.3% or 6.5% or 6.8%, like how much extra is that PMI
Yeah.
So if there's no PMI, effectively it's like an interest rate drop, but it's not literally an interest
It
rate
gives
drop.
buyers more buying power is the bottom line. That's what you're
Exactly.
trying to say. So on a $400,000 house, I believe it equates to almost exactly $25,000 more. So you turn your $400,000 into a $425,000 buyer, which doesn't sound radically more, but in some markets, 425 is the entry, and they wouldn't be buying at all if they didn't have that.
We met with someone who's an expert about the conservatorship with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. We're going to have him on the podcast. I think not next week, but the week after, pretty sure.
Yes.
In any event, I was asking him because I really didn't understand. And now that I thought I knew all the facts about Fannie, Freddie, and conservatorship and all the rest of it. And this is very wonkish and sounds boring, but I promise you guys it's going to create an enormous opportunity for all of you. As soon as they're out of conservatorship, that it's going to be a lot of new mortgage products, a lot of new activity, a lot of people that are on the sidelines now are going to be able to buy homes again. But I asked him, so who is it that why would someone in power not want the agencies to come out of conservatorship? And then I mentioned some specific names of some people that are often cited in the media about, well, so-and-so is saying that they should stay in conservatorship or they'll never come out of conservatorship. And it's always the same, maybe 2 or 3 names. And he said, well, that's a great question. And the answer is because they're all making money from PMI. And they're fearful that if Fannie Freddie comes out of conservatorship, that the first thing that's going to happen is there'll be no more PMI. And the PMI has been a forced expense on behalf of, the buyers are having to pay it forever. And it's a shit ton of money. And that money is going to somewhere. And it's like you're being forced to insure the mortgage company. You're being forced to insure. The whole thing is just really insane. And it also turns out there's a lot of other expenses that are packed in there that have become little honey holes for example, up until 2019, what was happening to all the profit from Fannie and Freddie? Well, I researched that. And it turns out that money was going to Treasury, and the money was actually being earmarked for specific, green energy type things. So that's strange, isn't it? Couldn't the government have used that same amount of money it was peeling away for green energy type things to effectively buy mortgage-backed securities or other types of things to get interest rates down? All of that is going to happen. So I know this is high nerd for a lot of you. It's very fascinating for me, because here it is. We're all saying, well, interest rates have to go lower. Well, Fannie and Freddie control vast majority of all the mortgage markets, and they're the ones that are making the rules, and they're the ones that are forcing buyers to experience all these really unnecessary expenses. Interest rates are really only half the problem, aren't they? The rest of it's all this, packed in ridiculous, unnecessary expense. So we eliminate one of those things, the interest rates become less of a point. That's really what we're focused on.
Yeah, and in fact, with PMI, we often use the example of the $400,000 home because that's the national average. But for many of you listening, we know that your entry level is more like, 7, 8, 900,000, or some places even more. So if you spin that math up, I did an experiment on that at 725, if you took PMI away from that person, say they put 10% down, and applied that payment, which was like 400 something, I think.
The PMI was 400 something? Are you serious?
And I only took the PMI at the average PMI.
Hold on. So you're saying if a mortgage is 700,000, the monthly payment, it's 5,000.
It's like 400, yeah.
It's $5,000 a year basically in PMI?
Yeah, and sometimes more depending on the borrower. But what does that do in buying power? It was almost $70,000 more of house.
That's insane.
Okay, so that's why it matters, right? And the other thing, you had mentioned other mortgage products. Do you remember we did a lot of deals where they closed with an 80-10-10 loan? Mm-hmm. The point of the 80-10-10, so you owe, the LTV is 80%, but you also owe the 10 on top, but that was a second mortgage, which defeated PMI. That was the whole point of doing the 80-10-10. That may come back, for example.
Well, there are going to be a lot of hybrid mortgages like that. I think private investors are going to be able to easily, right now, the reason this isn't happening is because they can't easily do it because of a lot of the regulation. But for example, there'll be opportunities for you to invest in single family homes, and you'll be able to put help. Basically, you're going to be able to invest money with ABC, whatever it's called, ABC, home investment company, let's say. And they're going to pool money together, and then they're going to lend, or they're going to take an equity position in someone's home, giving them the down payment. So if someone has good credit, all the boxes are checked, they need 10%, $1 million house, they only have 50 grand. Well, they're then going to go to this potential equity partner. The equity partner then is going to put the extra 50 grand down. They're going to then, the only way, so they're going to get the 50 grand, they're going to get the money back. The investor will get the money back when that person decides to sell the house. that they're going to get a percent of the appreciation on the property. So they're just basically been a straight up investor wanting to benefit from the appreciation or the inflation on the property, which I think is a pretty good, safe investment. Well, what if all of a sudden you now are able to go to all of your buyers, no matter what their situations are financially, and you could say, listen, you don't need to put your $200,000 down anymore on your $1 million house. You don't have to put 20% down. I have this investment program where I know of a company that they'll essentially take an equity position. You don't have to pay them. You're not paying. It's not like a second mortgage where you're paying anything towards that, paying that investor. The investor's just going to sit and wait for you to get ready to sell the house. And whatever that's going to be, you decide when you're going to sell the house, and then they're going to get whatever, however the math works out as a percent of the, money that they gave you to buy the house in the first place. You guys get it?
It's kind of like a limited partnership deal for a single family home.
Well, that's
think about it,
basically
right?
That's a good way of thinking of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus like having a mortgager, which people have done that. I bring that up because that's a very common thing to do with apartment buildings, condos, bigger, and
you know who's doing that
multifamily.
Here? Alan Weiss is the one that's raising. He wants to start a company like that.
Yeah, well, that's really cool.
And he's the owner of Weiss Analytics, and he's also one of the founders of what's the big housing thing that everyone cites all the time, Case-Shiller.
Yes.
Okay, so it was Case-Shiller Weiss, housing index.
He would know.
We should get him on the podcast.
We should.
Yeah,
Note to self.
We should. All right, note to self. All right,
okay, back to our myths. Myth number 4: the market is flooded with unsold homes. Now, if you're in Florida or parts of Texas, you may feel that now and then locally. But overall, flooded? No, it's more like a drought. Inventory is still way below normal. We just talked about that. A balanced market is about a 6-month supply. We're sitting nationwide at about 2.6 months. Builders can't keep up with the demand, although they're going to catch up eventually, but that takes a lot of time. And existing homeowners are sitting tight, especially with low mortgage rates. So we're going to be behind on inventory for a very long time. So myth number 4, the market's flooded with more inventory. So look at it this way. We've been really low on inventory for a really long time. So when you see it tick up, oh my gosh, we have 10% more inventory.
I want to go back to something you just said. You said we're going to be behind in inventory for a really long time.
Yeah.
That's a general statement, which I'm sure you didn't mean it'll be that's not true for obviously all markets.
No.
Because some markets are going to be swimming in new construction.
Yes, I think it's going to greatly depend on the regulation, deregulation, the land management, the release of federal lands. I mean, not every state has a lot of land to release.
Look at Austin, for example.
Yeah.
Really effectively, a lot of new construction options.
Tons, partially because they have less regulation.
Well, but sure. But the point is that you might say, well, there's not enough inventory, and those are good generalized statements for the entire country. But if you are in a market like Austin, inventory, new construction options are not a problem.
That's true. Now, that's why I said if you're in Texas or Florida,
right,
you may have a different experience and today, right? And future markets tomorrow. So adjust accordingly. And I have to make a note because I'm glad that you wanted some clarification on that. Whenever you're taking a new listing, right, you are going to look at, if I was a buyer and I wanted to see your listing, what else am I going to see? And you're going to do that search. In some cases, you're going to see you're still the only thing on the market. In other markets, like Austin is a great example of that, you're going to see, no, there's actually 2 or 3 other neighborhoods with 10 listings apiece in them and new construction around the corner and another option 1 county away,
exactly,
right? So you have to take it on a case-by-case scenario.
So listen, this is a good time to remind everyone that you can join Premier Coaching right now for free. Just go to premiercoaching.com or text the word Premier to 47372. Remember, Premier Coaching is your A to Z real estate solution. If you're looking to learn how to lead generate, if you're looking how to build essentially a very robust real estate business where you have consistent cash flow, consistent number of listings. And this isn't just a package of information. You're going to get real live daily coaching when you join Premier Coaching. And the best part is, I'm sure most of you will agree, is you can join Premier Coaching right now for free. And yes, Premier Coaching is going to include Ethical Real Estate Professional, which is our exclusive designation that we're going to be talking more about hopefully in the coming days. Julie and I are talking about actually doing a big Zoom where we're just going to let whoever wants to come, and we're going to informally take all of you guys through what we've been creating in our lab, basically, and getting some feedback on it. We don't really think it's necessary that we take a time to have a real fancy formalized presentation. I think you guys will agree when you see what we've created for all of you, that you're all going to want to participate because the value of what it's going to offer you so that you can obviously then present it to your marketplace is so obvious. So anyway, we're working on all that. Stay tuned to this channel. But in the meantime, here's the bottom line, is make sure you guys are joining Premier Coaching. That's how you're going to get advanced access to all the things that we're creating for you for this new market. Go to premiercoaching.com. or simply text the word Premier to 47372. Julie, the next point I love. Myth number 5, real estate, and this is what a lot of people say, real estate is no longer a good investment.
Gosh, doesn't that give you a headache? All right, so fact. Tell that to the millions of homeowners sitting on record equity. We're not just saying so. We did the research on this. The Federal Reserve reports that homeowner equity is at an all-time high. Real estate has always been a solid long-term investment, and that has not changed. As of the third quarter of 2024, U.S. homeowners with mortgages, representing about 62% of all properties, have seen their average home equity rise to about $311,000.
So traditionally, the people trying to sell you stocks and bonds and other forms of, equities and investments, commission-based people trying to sell you maybe whole life insurance policies and things like that. People that were competing for your real estate dollar, right? So you have enough money to buy a house or an investment property. They're going to be the ones that are going to try to talk you out of buying it because after all, they want you to put it into their mutual fund or things like that. So a lot of, and I'm only telling you guys this so you can open your eyes, a lot of the entities or the motivations that people have for telling you that real estate is no longer a good investment are people that are trying to sell you, air quoting here, alternative investments, and they know you basically have limited money and you're going to have to either buy, say, for example, a mutual fund from them or a whole life insurance policy from them, or you're going to, use that money for your down payment on your rental property or your house, right? You guys get it? So make sure when you're listening to some of these all-seeing, usually on YouTube types who are saying real estate's no longer a great investment when you compare it to this, compare it to that. Well, let me guess. You're trying to sell me into the this or the that you happen to be making a big old commission on. Again, nothing wrong with what they're selling. It might even be a really cool product, but open your eyes and actually use facts so you can make an informed decision. And do remember, you're going to come across consumers that are going to be confused about a lot of this stuff too. So make sure you use our notes, and the notes are available at harrisrealestatedaily.com. Myth number 6, a wave of foreclosures is coming.
Well, here's the fact. Foreclosures are also near historic lows. Why? Because of the stricter lending standards we talked about at the top of the podcast and significant homeowner equity we just mentioned. Adam Data Solutions says foreclosure filings last year were down 70% compared to the peak during the Great Recession. Homeowners are not underwater anywhere like they were in 2008. In fact, we have homeowner equity across the country of $17.5 trillion. And I know that you'll remember this, Tim, in the housing crash, practically everybody you knew, almost everybody that our coaching clients were transacting with, representing, was upside down. They had zero equity. It wasn't anywhere near $17.5 trillion of equity.
We're going to get one to that in a latter point, but what she's trying to explain to all of you guys is that back when the housing crash happened, nobody had any equity in the house. And so if all of a sudden they woke up and they found out that their $400,000 house was worth $250,000 and they were still making payments as if it were $400,000 and they could go rent literally the same house down the street for half of what their payment was, what they did is they would essentially just leave their existing house and they go rent the other one and they bail on their existing one. Or what they would do is they would go and buy the other one that was priced for, half of what theirs was, and they'd lock in a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and then they would bail on their underwater property.
It was actually called the buy and bail.
It was called the buy and the bail. Yep.
There were so
That's
many.
right.
I mean, we could go on, but we won't.
Right. Now, that obviously isn't something we taught, but that's something a lot of...
It did happen, though, and it was not an infrequent thing. This was a very common thing.
It was all over Las Vegas.
Yes, Vegas and Inland Empire in California, in Phoenix. A lot of Florida was doing that. So then this was something that happened, like a year and a half into the housing crash after people had figured out, hey, it's not like my price isn't going to just bounce back.
We were living in Las Vegas when all this was going on in 07 and 08 and partially in 09. And every weekend there would be ads that would show up on Craigslist and some other types of websites where someone basically was they're giving the keys back to the bank. They're completely bailing on the mortgage. And what they were doing is allowing anybody to come by and buy all the appliances, buy the cabinets, and even some of the plumbing. Now, most of the plumbing was PVC, so it wasn't worth anything.
They're literally parting out their house.
They would sell the pool equipment. They would sell
the air conditioner.
Everything. Yeah. So you would drive into some of these neighborhoods in Vegas, and there would be nothing in the houses. They were completely gone. And so that's the reason that, a lot of the market was as bad as it was for as long as it was, is because there was no systems in place to basically, obviously, give people incentives not to essentially, do what a lot of folks were doing.
Yeah, one of the things that I occasionally have coaching clients watch that don't quite buy all of those stories.
Well, thus cash for keys.
Yeah.
So that would be one of the things we teach agents to do when we were showing them how to
Yep.
work with banks is you'd go to the seller with the bank's money and you'd offer them sometimes in a ridiculous amount of money to leave. Basically, you have 30 days, 60 days. We'll give you $25,000. I'll meet you at the door. You give me the keys. I'll walk through the house. The house has to be in broom swept condition.
Not trashed.
And there has to, exactly. Not trashed and nothing stolen.
You can't have, like iguanas in the pool and green, mold and all of that.
Well, I mean, you guys get the point. So nothing like that is happening in a market near you.
Not even close. There is an interesting movie, though. If you remember 99 Homes, everything in that movie did happen. We have evidence from coaching clients in those years. So if you're more interested.
Myth number 7, investors are driving up prices and will cause a crash. And this is something that was an absolute boondoggle of BS during the last election cycle. And it was shocking how easy it was to debunk this. And yet still people to this day think that big hedge funds, BlackRock and all these others, they're the ones buying all the single family homes and running prices up. Well, guess what? Julie and I used a little bit of maybe 10 minutes worth of research time and found out that was a complete lie. And the percent of homes that are actually owned by entities that owned more than 100 doors altogether. I don't remember what the percent was. But
It's very low.
It's like less than 5%.
It is less than 5%.
But there's a statistic here.
Yes. CoreLogic reports that investors accounted for about 18% of home purchases. Now, that puts everybody in the same bucket, like small investors,
Right.
big investors. What your statistic is right. I think it's actually less than 3% of the BlackRock type of, huge investors don't actually own all of, entire neighborhoods. Most of these are, when we talk about 18% of home purchasers or investors, these are mostly small scale investors, not giant corporations flipping entire
But
neighborhoods.
like Elizabeth Warren, and all these others were saying,
She still says that.
I'm going to stop, these big investors from buying up single family homes and running out families and da-da-da-da. Like, you can't do the math and figure out how few homes they've actually bought that they actually own. And they're not flipping them. They're holding them as long-term rentals.
It was just a talking point that got out of control.
It's politics, but how many of you guys to this day still believe it? I mean, do your own homework. Don't believe Julie and I. Go, fire up Chat GPT.
Go facting on your own if you have to.
Here are your keywords. Ask how many homes or how many, investors or funds that own more than 100 homes. What percent of all the real single-family homes in the United States do they own? Now, if you're going to do the same homework and you're going to look for multifamilies, they do own a ton of multifamilies. But single family is not the case. Myth number 8.
That's right. Okay. Got to wait to buy. I'm going to wait to buy until prices drop. I know you guys listening have heard this from some buyer prospects. Going to wait until prices drop. Well, here's the fact. Trying to time the market is like trying to catch a falling knife. You're probably going to get cut trying to do that. Home prices historically trend upward. Another thing you can feed to ChatGPT and see all kinds of charts and graphs on. But waiting for the mythical bottom could mean missing out on appreciation and getting stuck with higher interest rates.
But waiting doesn't negate your present housing cost, whether you're renting or whatever. So like if you're waiting to buy a new TV and you have an existing TV and it works just fine and the TV's paid for, well, then waiting, you might actually save a buck. But when it comes to real estate, you're having to pay something anyway, especially if you're renting. And you guys get the point? So oftentimes, if you factor in inflation, like agents conflate, use interchangeably the word inflation with appreciation. So they kind of act the same way. Right now, what we're experiencing is inflation in real estate. It's what we've been experiencing for a long time. I think during the rush up in housing values because of COVID, that was genuine appreciation. But now it's just inflation. So homes are inflating in cost, but so is everything else. It's not increasing your buying power. The numbers look better, I suppose, but at the end of the day, it's not really making that much of an appreciable difference on people's. The net worth numbers are increasing, but if the buying power is the same, then what real difference does it make? Moral of the story is know the facts. Next myth, Julie.
Yes, next myth sounds similar to the last one, but we've got a little spin to it. The myth is that high prices are all because of investors or flippers or people of that nature. We talked about that a second ago, but remember, as a talking point, because you will hear this come up at parties and things that you're at talking about real estate, the real culprits of higher prices are, number one, low inventory, demand being higher than the supply, right? And rising construction costs. Investors are just a little part of the equation. A lot of investors are not even buying anymore because they have the same problem that everybody else does.
It's all supply and demand. At the end of the
Yes.
day, it's all supply and demand, and a vast majority of the demand is coming from normal people wanting to buy a home to live in. It's not coming from, a big investment thing. It's not coming from some cabal of, things that are people that are just
evil
running
empire.
prices up, trying to take it, some evil corporation. Don't believe any of it. It's just because there's a lot of people out there that need a bigger house to buy a house or want to sell a house, want to buy investment properties. Normal supply and demand. That's what we're experiencing. And for most of the market, most of the country, the demand is outstripping the supply. Thus, we're seeing appreciation or inflation.
Exactly. Okay, our final myth of the day, the housing market is totally unpredictable. Well, the fact is that we can't predict the future with 100% accuracy. You can certainly watch trends, though, and watch the facts that are based on data, inventory levels, interest rates, demographic shifts. You can get a very clear picture of what's happening, and you can make some pretty clear predictions. We're always educating you, motivating you, and getting you into action using facts over fear,
All right, fast facts. Okay, I didn't incorporate these into those previous 10 points.
Sure.
But let's just blaze through these because this really cuts through and underlines a lot of the things we were trying to help them understand. Go ahead, Julie.
Some bullet points for you guys. Again, talking points. 40% of U.S. homes don't even have a mortgage. Why do you care? Because it can't be upside down. It can't become a short sale, and it can't be foreclosed on, maybe for taxes, but very unusual because 40% of them don't even have a mortgage. Okay. So next, also those people are not locked in because of a low interest rate. They're probably going to move anyway and use their equity.
Well, but that's so dumb that these big guys that are predicting a housing crash don't take into consideration that basically 40% of all the mortgages homes have no mortgage. I'm not really sure how those go into default with no loan.
I know, and there are areas where, like our neighborhood in Murphy, North Carolina, there's not a single person in our neighborhood that has a mortgage, according to the developer. So
Right.
that's 100%, right?
Another fast fact for you. Of the homes with a mortgage, the average equity, this I didn't know, by the way, is $315,000. Now, I got a little newsflash for all of you. People with that much equity are not going to let their homes go into default.
I'll just walk away. Said no one ever.
I mean,
with $315 grand.
they've got all kinds of room to lower the price and make the house sell fast if they wanted to. So if the average equity position of a homeowner is $315,000, remember those are the ones with a mortgage. With a mortgage, obviously the ones without a mortgage have a hell of a lot more equity. Well, guess what? There's not going to be any foreclosure problem with people having over $300,000. Now, the naysayers will say, "What if there's this big, fast, some sort of apocalypse?" Horrible thing that happens and all that equity just goes away overnight. It doesn't work that way.
No.
And again, we're going back to supply and demand. We're going back to the fact that demand's increasing despite interest rates. We're going back to all the previous myths that some of you guys that are trying to, sell people things that they don't need, agents, to get on lists and all these other secret handshake backroom deals to get the supposed slew of REOs that certainly must be coming. You guys have got to prove what you're talking about using numbers. So if you guys any of you want to have a meaningful conversation about this, I'll tell you what we'll do. We will put together a podcast and we'll get Logan Mohtashami, and Julie and I will moderate, and we'll put together a Zoom. And you come prepared to have Logan gut you, by the way. Anyway, you come prepared to talk about why you believe there's going to be a housing crash and bring all your facts and figures. And Logan will do the same thing. And Julie and I will keep it nicey as much as we can.
Yeah.
Not that we're biased.
Well, he has a standing challenge that he likes doing that kind
Exactly. And so let it roll. So if any of you who are speaking from the mountaintops, swearing there's going to be a housing crash, want to actually debate it, let's go. That's all I have to say about that.
And you know what? One thing that we didn't talk about was in the housing crash, unemployment reached almost 11%. Okay. Unemployment is low now, so people are not going to just walk away.
Okay, so this next point is mind-boggling. 50 of those with a mortgage, 56.2% of all mortgage of homes with 56.2% of the existing mortgages, and remember 40% of the homes have no mortgage, have interest rates less than 4%. Okay, I want you to think about that. So we know that basically rounding up 60% of all the homes in the United States have a mortgage. Roughly 60% of all those homes in the United States with a mortgage have an interest rate of less than 4%.
And it's fixed.
And many of those are assumable. In other words, they can actually sell that house to somebody else, and that same person can, or the next buyer can assume that 4% mortgage. We've done lots of podcasts and lots of training and Premier Coaching about that. And let's not forget, of all those people with a mortgage, the average equity position they have is $315,000. Do you guys remember when we told you, what was it, myth number 7? The real problem was that nobody had any equity in their homes during the housing crash. Home values, all these things happened. They didn't have any value, or they didn't have any equity, not because they put down a huge down payment and they lost it. They didn't have any equity because the banks didn't require them to put down really any down payment. And then when the market just adjusted by 5 or 10%, those people were underwater, and a lot of them, because the mortgage standards were so easy, had bought 3, 4, 5, 10 homes, and that was their get-rich scheme basically. And when they were all underwater on all those properties, and they couldn't flip them to the next guy, they bailed on all of them. That was the dominoes, and that's exactly what happened, which is nothing like that is happening now.
Nothing.
I think all of you will agree. And the last point, Jules, you can read that one.
Foreclosure rates are down 70% from the Great Recession peak. So that, I think they're still running less than 3% of total mortgages, keeping in mind that not everybody even has a mortgage. So it's really radically low. I watched a video of somebody trying to sell, there's a wave of REOs coming. And whoever was interviewing him asked this great question. He's like, the background was the guy himself specialized in REOs. He was going to sell a list, blah, blah, blah. And the interviewer said, well, I think this guy was in Chicago. And he said, well, tell me what it's like to be an REO agent in Chicago. Okay. And yeah, there are some REOs in Chicago and Phoenix and Vegas. They do exist for different reasons. But he said, well, being that I'm an REO guy, I pretty much have to work the entire city, all of the surrounding counties, and way out yonder in order to do the volume of business that he likes to do. So throughout the interview, I just thought it was interesting that he kind of debunked his own thing.
Well, you just said something, though.
Yeah.
So in every market, even the healthiest of housing markets, there are always going to be REOs. That's always going to happen. And right now, do you remember the statistic? I don't remember. I know it was 2, maybe 1 or 2%.
It's less than 3.
It's
gone up a tiny, tiny bit, but it's still less than 3%.
Right. So there you go. Bottom line, Julie Harris.
Yes. So the bottom line is the housing market is not crashing. It's evolving. Don't let fear-based clickbait shake your confidence. Stick to the facts. Educate your clients. Educate yourself. That's what we're trying to do on this podcast. And keep doing what you do best, helping people find their place in the world. Because at the end of the day, the real estate market doesn't run on fear. It runs on fundamentals. Those of you who are transacting right now know this. Look at your past 10 transactions. Why were they moving? We talked about that on a previous podcast, I think this week. Why are they moving? Circumstantial reasons, not because of interest rates, not because of anything else. It's because they need a third bedroom for their kid that's on the way,
Listen, we know that right now, having listened to this information, that you're definitely feeling educated. Make sure you get our notes, Harris Real Estate Daily. Now, hopefully you're also feeling motivated. Motivation comes from knowing things that maybe other people don't know. Motivation comes from the excitement you feel to be able to deploy this new information to help other people, let people know the facts, all those types of things. But ultimately, it's up to you to take action. If you're unsure of what actions to take, that's the reason you should join Premier Coaching. Just go to premiercoaching.com or click the link below to join Premier Coaching. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, and we'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.